on the day they announced the Booker shortlist, and in which I have my first event in nearly 2 years, I have decided to release a book. Hi everyone, my name is Charlie, and today I want to talk to you about Doris Ahoy. This is my third book, following on from Our Doris and Indisputably Doris, and follows the character of Mrs Doris Copeland as she embarks upon a world cruise. She doesn't expect any adversity, but a question arises as to the identity of the mysterious Mrs Veronica Ambrose. There's a dance competition that pits her against Ken, a man that Arold has accidentally offended by being somewhat fatphobic. This is probably the most modern of my books, I'd say. I'd say there are definitely some more references to modern technology and films upon this cruise ship. This is a book that I never anticipated being released on its own, but earlier this year, as I was writing it, and the story grew to this length and became its own separate entity, I realised that with what I want to do with the final book, despite the fact I wanted to tell this story, it needed to be told on its own so as not to lessen the impact and the overall story of the final book in this series. Now, you might wonder, with this being my third book, why has it taken so long with it being actually just a really short novella? It's only 32,000 words, I believe, which is much shorter than Our Doris and Indisputably Doris. And so, why has it taken me so long? If we go back 2 years, then we will remember that Indisputably Doris wasn't necessarily the most successful book in the world. I planned my most events for that book because I was certain it was going to be a success. I'd been touring the first book around Cheshire and various other areas for 2 years. I'd had a break from writing that had been a bit defining for me in terms of my adult life, and that changed what I wanted to write about, but I really like Indisputably Doris. And when it wasn't a success, when I was going to events, people weren't interested, people weren't buying copies, I began to question why I was doing this, because I wrote that book for myself, and there are so many vlogs that you can go and look at where I talk about the fact that I wrote that book for me. I've always said that with it not being the success I imagined, that gave me the permission to go on and do other things. I wanted to write my children's book, so I spent some time doing that. And in January of 2018, I decided to write a secret book. That book is still secret. I've not talked about it on here, apart from to say I'm working on the secret project. There's a writing vlog where I discuss that. I have shared it with a few people now. I've now hired an editor for that, who is Dane of Dane Reads. Yeah, I'm sharing that information so that Dane can then go on and actually talk about the work he's doing, should he so wish. We're not going to talk about what the book's about, we're not going to talk about anything to do with it, just know that the secret book is there, and if I plan to do something in future, I will. But that's what I spent my time on. And then earlier this year, I wasn't really working on the children's book or anything, and Doris just popped up. Well, it was Arold, and he had something to say, and what he wanted to say ended up turning into a book. I did ask the question as to whether I should include it in the third and final book or whether to release it as a separate novella, and it seems that most people were quite happy for it to be this novella on its own that bridges the gap between Indisputably Doris and the final book. It is its own story. It's all about Arold and Doris recuperating after the events of the last 2 books. I've also been aware that these characters have grown somewhat in the 8 years that I've been writing them. I think that the tone has changed. I'd say this book is definitely more sentimental than anything I've written before. This isn't because I wanted to write something more cosy. The reason behind it ended up being that I really found that placing Doris and Arold in close quarters with one another without any of their home comforts really gave me a chance to analyse their relationship as an author, and I feel as though I know these characters inside out. And in the first book, and over time I've wondered, why has Arold stuck with this acerbic woman since the 1960s? And it's been the question that's been there, because I feel like there's a genuine love there. Despite how horrible Doris can be, Arold still quite likes her. Indeed, that's actually included in the first book. And I know that these characters have grown, and the way that they communicate with each other has changed. And with it being a novella, I feel as though the form has changed as well. It's set out completely differently to the first two books. I will show you. Rather than have different chapter headings, there are only two parts to this story, so they're separated by 1 and 2, which obviously that's a bit simple, but then I've gone further and separated it into very short sections, just because I feel as though it's easier for the reader to read, but also because I wanted to highlight that this is a bit of a different story. It's very short. You'll probably be able to get through it in an hour. I think it's humorous. I think it's a bit heartwarming, and yes, it is sentimental. It was an informed decision that this book ended up being more sentimental. And I think I'm also thinking in the back of my mind, sometimes Doris can be a bit of a bully at points, and I wanted to highlight that, and I wanted to actually see these characters called out and see how they fit in with the modern day and some modern day attitudes, and I discussed that. It's a very short book to discuss it in, but I do that. And then the final book that I've got planned, I think if I pull it off, it could be great, and if I don't and you all hate it, that's fine as well. So, what are my plans for Doris Ahoy? Honestly, there are none. After the disappointing events towards the latter end of 2017, when I released Indisputably Doris, I found it difficult to go and do events then. I did some events at the start of 2018, but since February 2018, I haven't done any events apart from an open mic sort of thing that I did for Our Doris earlier this year. And tonight I am going to be speaking to the Adlington WI, and that was arranged in June 2018. Again, I completely forgot that that was happening today, because in my head that was happening on the 9th, and I don't know where I got that from, but I was certain I was going to the WI on the 9th of September, and wouldn't it be nice to have another book for them? Well, I didn't. I'm actually there tonight. So on the launch day, Our Doris will actually be at a WI. I have decided that the discussion is going to be about how I failed as an indie author. And I think that's going to be a nice chat. It's going to be all of my mistakes used to tell these people what not to do, because I've made all of the mistakes in the world. One of my biggest issues is that I never actually promote myself as being the person to say, do you know what? Go and buy this book, support me. I know I ask for support, but oftentimes I will just send the books out into the world. I did it a lot with Indisputably Doris, because I still have 200 copies that are filled with mistakes that I didn't notice, and any new copies purchased of Amazon have all of those mistakes removed, apart from the apostrophe thing that I only noticed last month. Because of that, I send those copies out for free more often than not, and I don't want to do that with Doris Ahoy. I would be very appreciative if you went over to my website rather than Amazon, because whilst buying off Amazon does raise my ranking on their website, it also means that I make very little from the book. When it came to doing events this year, I just didn't want to. And I feel as though if I do events that I don't necessarily want to do, then what's the point? And also, whenever I've done events before, it's always been with me reading a few stories, talking about what I've been up to, and I don't really know what I'd say about releasing such a short novella. It's definitely a strange one, and I know all of my writer friends have been shouting at me and telling me I should be holding events for this book. It's the only way I'm going to get my book out there, promoted and purchased. But for some reason, my confidence took a knock in 2017, and it just hasn't come back. Either way, in terms of Doris Ahoy, I am proud of the final product. I think the characters go on another journey, and they're getting back to themselves towards the end of this book. And I do look forward to seeing how things work out for the final book. I know the title, but I'm not letting it on yet. And I'm hoping that I can write that book and release it sooner rather than later. I wouldn't like for people to have to wait 2 years for the final book, because there are other books that I have to write, and I have plans, and I've made deadlines, and usually plans and deadlines don't work for me. But hopefully, if everything works out, you will get the final book sooner, and then you can see just how Doris's story works out and see just why I've been telling this story since 2015. So them's the books. Don't they look good together? If you would like to purchase any of my books, then the links to do so are in the description. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.